The Mating School by Jonas Mears, Chapters 15 and 16. Chapter 15. The dining hall was already crowded for lunch by the time Lily arrived. She could see Anne and Sophie sitting at one of the more central tables as she went towards the tray and dishware. But before she got more than 2 steps toward it, a voice stopped her. "I meant to give this to you," said a deep voice, and sensing the power, she knew who it would be. She turned to see Ryan standing back a bit. It was a moment's pause before he held out an envelope. She hesitated to break eye contact to take the message. It wasn't for dominance reasons, but instead, defense. She couldn't be sure if he'd attack or something if she looked away. And yet, there was no reason for him to be attacking her, particularly not in the middle of the crowded eating area. She glanced at the note in his hand before her eyes jumped back to his face. She thought about accidentally brushing one of her fingers against his hand as she went to take the note. That would confirm they weren't mates, at least. Only, she couldn't bring herself to do it. He would have known what she was doing, and she wasn't sure if she could handle the embarrassment. Her eyes seemed to soften before she adjusted her gaze and took the note from him. "Thanks," she said, but it almost sounded like a question. "Don't mention it," he said, turning towards the buffet. Lily tucked the message away, not wanting to read it here, where there were so many other students. It was a few minutes later when she joined her friends with her food in hand. She tried to blend in best she could, and act as if what just happened was not significant. But that didn't stop other students from looking at her with intrigue as she passed. "Exchanging love letters already," said Anne the moment Lily sat down. "Oh, shut it," said Lily. "The rumors are bad enough without you saying things like that." "You know the lichen," said Sophie, leaning in and talking in a whisper. "Well, no," said Lily. "It was true, really. They're like practically mates," Anne said to Sophie. "Haven't you heard the rumors?" Lily laughed. "There will be rumors if you keep on like that, Anne." "So you're not mates?" Sophie said to Lily. "No, definitely not," said Lily. "I mean, I don't think so." Part 2. The forested energy control classroom was rather comforting and inviting. Lily knew that it was only the 3rd day, but she was already starting to feel a sense of familiarity with this new life. There was something systematic about it. There was direction also. Something she'd never really experienced as an orphaned servant, where the only escape was to get switched to another pack or to shift. 2 things that had always seemed outside of her control before now. There hadn't been time to read the message given to her at lunch, but she did take a slight detour to her dorm before class to drop it off. She wasn't sure why, just that it seemed safer somehow. She wished there had been time to read it. She was almost to a place to sit by a young tree when an angry voice approached her from behind. "You've got problems now," said Irene. "I told you to back off." And before Lily could say anything at all, Irene punched her in the face. The sound was sickening. "I won't tell you again," said Irene with her mouth set in a snarl. Lily didn't care that she was breaking the rules. She didn't care that she'd be missing class. She had to leave. She saw Ryan before she got to the door. She wasn't sure what made her say it, but she found the words spilling out before she could stop them. "Why don't you do something about your girlfriend?" Part 3. The trip to the infirmary was a quiet one, with nearly all the other students either in classes or quiet study. The infirmary was white and beautiful in a simple kind of way. The shifters that worked there were sweet and caring. They brought a pack of ice and allowed her to stay, even though Lily suspected that it probably wasn't commonplace to let students out of classes because they got punched. But she was grateful for it. They ran some tests according to protocol, but there wasn't much they could do about a black eye. When she did leave, it was nearly time for dinner, but she didn't feel hungry. She remembered how just this morning she'd made grand plans to try to shift after classes. And based on what she learned about the significance of her mental mindset, she knew her odds of shifting had gone down the toilet. She decided to return to her dorm instead. Maybe a bath would help with the uncomfortable stuffiness from her cold and the dryness of her throat. Since the other students were in the dining hall, it seemed like a good time also to read the message that Ryan had given her earlier. She wished now that he'd given it to her in abilities class instead of in front of Irene and most of the student body. Why couldn't he have just given it to her then? It would have been more convenient anyway. He wouldn't have needed to track her down. She remembered his face as she left the energy class. Lily knew she shouldn't have said anything. It wasn't a smart move to say things that might anger a lichen. At least she wouldn't have to see him again until the abilities class on Friday. Maybe she'll understand the situation and her place in this new world better then. Maybe, said the quiet voice of her mind. Maybe, Lily agreed as she walked through the familiar stone hallways towards her dorm. Chapter 16. We'll have to go to the library to look for the book, Lily said to Anne as they moved down the corridor, though Anne's movements were admittedly rather sluggish. Well, I get that, said Anne. But I don't get why we're doing that at 6 a.m. on a Saturday when I had plans to sleep in. Because there's work to be done, said Lily, rounding the turn that leads to the grand staircases. After breakfast? Said Anne, gesturing towards the direction behind them. Breakfast isn't until 12, remember, said Lily, referring to when her first meal of the day would be. Before Anne could object and say lunch was at 12, Lily continued, I thought you wanted to know what the note says. Anne tilted her head a bit, suggesting that maybe she didn't care that much after all. And yet, now that she was up, she was curious about what Lily would figure out. Better to be there with her at the time of the discoveries than to get a summarized or potentially botched version later. What's the book called again? She asked as they entered the library, which was very much deserted. The Return of the Lichens by Nathaniel McAfee, said Lily. For a class? Anne hedged carefully. No, that's what Ryan's note said Lily. But it wasn't from Ryan. It seems he was just a messenger because it was signed Miss Art. You think it's a teacher? I don't think a student would have gotten Ryan to deliver it, said Lily. I wish she had delivered it to me herself. Would have saved me from Irene's irrational irateness. Interesting, said Anne as they neared the M Authors and the Resources section. Do you think Miss Art could have put something in the book? Said Lily. Maybe she just wants you to read it. It wasn't long until the girls found the large leather-bound volume. Anne picked up one as well titled, I Can Lichen. Lily laughed. She couldn't help it. It seemed like such a stupid name for a book, and she told Anne as much. Don't judge a book by its title. They moved towards the back of the library and got settled in one of the largest group study rooms. The books landed on the table with resounding thumps. Lily, who was getting in the habit of her new schedule, slid out a notebook and pen from her satchel. She felt excitement, not just to see what the book held for her, but also for the sense of normalcy, a feeling of belonging, to be just another student in this big school sitting down to start studying. Unfortunately, nothing slipped out of the book upon opening it, which meant that the next 2 hours were spent reading the fine print. They're born from shifters? Lily said to Anne, who might have fallen asleep. Yeah? Said Anne, clearly not hearing what she'd just said. No, read right here, said Lily, pointing to a small passage under a graph showing the lichen's genome. Born from 2 shifter parents, a lichen is born a shifter and is likely to remain a shifter. Statistics show that potential lichens, more accurately defined as shifters who have the LRPRC2 gene, make up less than 0.4% of the shifter population. In nearly all cases, a shifter with the LRPRC2 gene, henceforth referred to as the lycanthropic gene, will exhibit behaviors similar to that of a shifter unless the lichen gene is activated. See more on page 365. It's believed that the trigger for this gene to be activated is the reason why lichens have not been seen for hundreds of years. Wow, that's crazy, said Anne when she finished reading the paragraph. See, Anne, said Lily, you could be a lichen, and we might not even know it. Then again, I've never heard of a female lichen. I wonder what the trigger is that causes the transformation. Did you check the reference page? Said Anne, suddenly much more engaged. Lily responded by turning to the page indicated, and they both leaned forward to read. As of the date of this publication, research regarding the lycanthropic gene is tentative and limited. However, certain environments and specific viruses have been found to have a high correlation with the activation of this gene. Stressful environments have been shown to have the highest association with the activation of the lycanthropic gene, including but not limited to situations of abuse and survival. The viruses, mainly consisting of the Ebola virus and the Lassa virus, have been tested and are believed to be indirectly correlated. Thus far, results have been inconclusive, largely because of the difficulty of segregating the effects of a virus from a more general environmental trigger. Furthermore, it's a challenging study to conduct due to the limited population of shifters that have the gene required for such studies. Wow, said Lily. Makes you glad you're not a lichen. Or a potential lichen, I guess. The subject of all these horrible science experiments where they unleash deadly viruses? That'd be horrible. I suppose so, said Anne. But the research is needed, and those viruses don't affect shifters without the lichen gene. They would just fight it off like any other illness. I don't know, Anne. It just doesn't seem right, said Lily, thinking about Ryan. She wondered if he was turned in one of those horrible experiments, or was his environment the trigger? She'd never thought of Ryan as anything but a title, really. The lichen. And now that she'd read about all those horrible things, she considered him in a different light. Not just a lichen, but rather someone real, a fellow student. What if the shifter didn't want to become a lichen? She asked Anne. How would they even know what being a lichen would entail? You're kidding, right? Said Anne. The lichen is the strongest species alive today. Anyone with the good fortune of having the lichen gene ought to be grateful. Maybe, said Lily, lost in her thoughts. She looked out the window. Assuming they survive the unpleasant environment and/or lethal virus they're subjected to. Assuming they survive the transformation into a lichen. It's for the greater good, though, said Anne. I don't know the whole prophecy yet, but I know that the lichens wouldn't be prophesied to come unless it was essential to the new reigning order and the well-being of shifters. But it's not fair to the would-be lichens. Risking their lives, and for what? Are they even told what they're signing up for when their gene is triggered? Anne seemed angry. Then again, Lily felt oddly angry also. It didn't seem right to put people in experiments like that. But she didn't push the topic. Instead, she closed the book. She wasn't sure if she was happy to have learned those things about lichens. She felt somehow haunted now. You want to go for a walk? Lily said. She wanted the emotions between them to dissipate. Anne was there with her at the start of this new situation. Both were cast into such a jarring and unexpected situation, both not knowing what to expect. and yet this new life seemed manageable with Anne. Things were okay so long as she wasn't alone. "Sure," said Anne. "A walk would be good. Maybe we could stop by the dining hall for a bagel to go, though. We can explore the fourth-floor courtyard after that. We've hardly seen any of it in our agility class." "Deal," said Lily, closing the heavy book. "Take a break from this lichen stuff